Picture this. A woman in her early 60s spends her Tuesday exactly like any other. She feels a little more tired than usual and blames it on a bad night's sleep. Her stomach feels slightly off, so she skips lunch. By evening, her jaw has a faint ache. She figures she's been clenching her teeth from stress. Not once does she think about her heart. 3 days later, a doctor tells her something almost impossible to believe. Her body had been warning her for days, and she missed every single sign. This isn't a rare story. It's one of the most common ones in cardiology. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why. In fact, the sign that sends the most women to the emergency room isn't even in their chest. Quickly, I'm Dr. William Mercer. After years spent reviewing cardiovascular research and clinical guidelines from groups like the American Heart Association, I'm not here to sell you anything today. No supplement, no program. I just want you to recognize what your body might already be telling you in language a 10-minute checkup rarely has time for. Let's start with the sign almost every woman on this list experienced first. This is tiredness that doesn't match your day, heavy, unfamiliar exhaustion that rest doesn't seem to fix. I think of a woman I'll call Sandra, a composite of patients I've worked with. Mid-60s, active, always the one keeping up with her grandkids. For about a week, she found herself needing to sit down mid-conversation, something completely out of character. She wasn't scared. She was embarrassed. She thought she was becoming lazy, and she didn't mention it to anyone for days because of that. This matters because that kind of fatigue is, by a wide margin, the most commonly reported symptom in the days before a heart attack in women, far more common than chest pain. Here's the takeaway. Fatigue that doesn't match your day is not laziness, it's information. So why does this happen in the first place? For decades, most heart attack research focused heavily on how symptoms show up in men. The sudden, crushing chest pain everyone associates with a heart attack. But women frequently experience something quieter and more spread out, without that dramatic chest pain at all. It's not that women's bodies are being mysterious. It's that the textbook picture of a heart attack was written mostly from male data, and research is still catching up to how differently this disease can present in women. Here's the science in plain terms. In many men, a heart attack comes from one major blockage in a large coronary artery, dramatic and often paired with that classic chest pain. In women, the picture is frequently different. Blockages are more often smaller and spread out across the tiny vessels feeding the heart, a pattern called microvascular disease. Instead of one big dam breaking, imagine dozens of small streams slowly being pinched at once, enough to strain the heart without producing that one unmistakable jolt of chest pain. There's a second concept worth knowing: referred pain. Your heart shares nerve pathways with your jaw, neck, and back, so distress from your heart can quietly show up somewhere else in your body entirely, misfiled by your brain. Hold on to those two ideas: smaller, spread-out blockages, and referred pain, because they explain almost everything left on this list. And here's a statistic worth sitting with for a second. According to the American Heart Association's Go Red for Women campaign, heart disease and stroke kill more women in the United States than all forms of cancer combined, causing roughly 1 in 3 deaths in women every year. Yet in surveys, most women still don't name heart disease as their greatest health risk. That gap between perception and reality is exactly why this video exists. Before we go further, I want to tell you what's coming. The sign on this list that most women mistake for something completely unrelated to their heart. The one that, looking back, patients almost always say they wish they'd taken seriously sooner. Stay with me, because it's probably not the one you're expecting. Fatigue is usually where the story begins, but for many women, the next clue appears the moment they start moving. This is breathlessness, doing things that never used to touch you, climbing a single flight of stairs, making the bed, carrying in groceries. When your heart struggles to pump efficiently, blood can back up into the vessels around your lungs, making even light effort feel like real exertion. I think of a woman I'll call Ruth, early 70s, who mentioned almost in passing that she'd started resting halfway up her own driveway, a driveway she'd walked daily for 20 years. She didn't want to admit it, even to herself. She told her husband it was her knees. Her knees were fine. Have you ever blamed a change like that on simply getting older without stopping to ask why? Here's what most people get wrong. They measure the symptom, not the change. Not whether you get breathless, but whether it now takes far less to trigger it than it used to. Remember this. If easy things suddenly leave you winded, it could be a warning sign of a heart problem and deserves prompt medical evaluation, not an explanation away. But the next sign surprised even researchers. This next symptom is probably the last place you'd expect your heart to speak from, your stomach. When your heart is under strain, your body's fight or flight response redirects blood away from digestion and toward your muscles and vital organs, which is exactly what can produce nausea or a queasy, off feeling that has nothing to do with food. This is the part that surprises cardiologists most. This symptom is reported by women before a heart attack far more often than in men, and it's almost always chalked up to a stomach bug or something eaten the night before. If you only remember one thing about this sign, your stomach doesn't lie, but it sometimes speaks for your heart. And this next one often shows up right alongside the last two, which is exactly why it matters. A sudden cold sweat with no clear trigger, or a lightheaded, unsteady feeling, both driven by that same fight-or-flight response, and both frequently dismissed as low blood sugar, dehydration, or standing up too fast. I think of a woman who described breaking into a cold sweat while folding laundry on a cool afternoon with the windows open. She checked the thermostat before she ever thought to check in with herself. This matters because on their own, these symptoms feel forgettable. What most people get wrong is treating each one as a separate, isolated inconvenience, rather than noticing when several show up together in the same week. Don't forget this. One odd symptom might be nothing. Several odd symptoms in the same week are rarely a coincidence. Let's pause and lock in what we've covered so far, because the next three build directly on this. Sign 1, extreme, unexplained fatigue. Sign 2, breathlessness with light activity. Sign 3, nausea or indigestion-like discomfort. Sign 4, cold sweats or dizziness. Notice that not one of these four is chest pain. That's exactly the point of this video. Quick myth to clear up, because it changes how you'll hear the rest of this list. Myth. A heart attack always starts with sudden, crushing chest pain, the kind you see in movies. Fact. Many women never experience that classic chest pain at all, before or during a heart attack. If you've been waiting for that specific sensation as your signal to worry, you may be waiting for a symptom that simply never arrives. And now, the sign I promised you earlier. The one most women mistake for something else entirely, and the one that, looking back, patients say they wish they'd taken seriously right away. Remember referred pain from earlier? This is it in real life. An ache, tightness, or discomfort in your jaw, neck, shoulder, or upper back, not your chest, because your brain is misreading exactly where your heart's distress signal is coming from. I think of a woman I'll call Patricia in her late 60s who described a dull ache in her jaw and left shoulder that came and went over about 4 days. She assumed it was a dental issue, and honestly felt a little silly even considering anything more serious. It wasn't a dental issue. By the time she was evaluated, doctors confirmed she'd had a heart attack days earlier, one her body had been trying to flag the entire time. Would you have connected an aching jaw to your heart? Be honest, most people wouldn't. That's exactly why this sign gets missed more than almost any other on this list. Here's the takeaway. An ache in the wrong place can still be the right warning. This next one is easy to blame on everything except your heart. Trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking up, feeling like you never really rested. Even mild reductions in how well your heart delivers oxygen can quietly disturb the nervous system rhythms that regulate your sleep. On its own, this obviously has 100 causes. But alongside any of the signs we've already covered, it becomes part of a pattern worth paying attention to. Remember this: when your body won't let you rest, don't just treat the symptom. Ask what it might be protecting you from. And now the last one, and the one I think gets the least credit of all, because almost nobody thinks of it as a heart symptom in the first place. A vague, nagging feeling that something isn't right, not tied to any specific worry, and easy to dismiss as just anxiety or a stressful week. Many women who later had a heart attack describe exactly this feeling in the days beforehand, often more clearly than they remember any physical symptom at all. Remember the woman from the very start of this video, going through her ordinary Tuesday? What she never mentioned, and what so many women in her position never mention, is that quiet sense that something felt off, pushed aside because there was nothing concrete to point to. If you only remember one thing from this whole video, let it be this: your body doesn't always speak in symptoms. Sometimes it speaks in a feeling you can't quite explain. Here's what matters more than memorizing 7 separate signs: recognizing the pattern when they show up together. Fatigue on its own might be a rough week. Fatigue plus breathlessness, plus a jaw ache, plus a feeling that something's off, that's not a rough week anymore. That's your body sending the exact signal we've spent this whole video decoding. Isolated symptoms are noise. 2 or more together, especially over the same several days, deserve a same-day call to your doctor. If you notice several of these signs together, right now, today, or at any point after watching this, here's exactly what to do. Call your local emergency number immediately. In the United States, that's 911. Do not drive yourself, and do not wait to see if it passes. Sit or lie down, try to stay calm, and if you're home alone, unlock your front door so responders can reach you quickly. If an emergency dispatcher advises you on aspirin, follow their guidance. Don't decide that on your own if you're unsure about allergies or other medications. If you're with someone else who's showing these signs, don't wait for them to insist they're fine. Trust the pattern, not their reassurance, and still make the call. Women are statistically more likely than men to downplay their own symptoms, even to paramedics. It is always better to be evaluated and find out it was nothing than to wait and find out it wasn't. And when you describe your symptoms to a dispatcher, a paramedic, or an emergency room doctor, describe them fully and plainly. Don't soften them, and don't downplay them because they don't feel dramatic enough to justify the call. "I've been unusually tired, nauseous, and my jaw aches" is exactly the kind of sentence that gets taken seriously when you say it clearly. Beyond recognizing the signs, there's real power in prevention. Know your numbers, blood pressure, cholesterol, and blood sugar, and get them checked regularly, since all 3 quietly affect your heart long before symptoms appear. If you smoke, quitting is one of the single most protective things you can do. Regular movement, even walking most days, meaningfully lowers risk. Aim for a diet built around vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and limit heavily processed foods. Manage stress where you can, and know your family history. Heart disease risk rises notably after menopause, so it's worth a direct conversation with your doctor about your personal risk, not just a general checkup. Screening guidelines from groups like the American Heart Association recommend starting these conversations well before any symptoms appear, not after. And perhaps most importantly, advocate for yourself. If something feels off and you're told it's probably just stress, it's completely reasonable to ask your doctor to look closer, request further testing, or get a second opinion. Heart disease risk assessment isn't a one-size-fits-all conversation, and you know your own body better than a 10-minute appointment ever could. Before you go, picture one specific woman in your life. Maybe it's your mother who's been more tired than usual and blaming it on her age. Maybe it's your sister who mentioned an odd ache in her shoulder and shrugged it off. Maybe it's you. If one person came to mind while you were watching this, send them this video today. It could help them recognize a warning they might otherwise dismiss the same way our woman from the beginning almost did. Because remember, she didn't ignore her symptoms because she was careless. She ignored them because nobody had ever told her they could mean a heart attack. Now you know, and now, so can she. Before you go, which of these 7 signs surprised you the most? Just drop the number in the comments. I read every single one. One last thing, and I say this at the end of every video. Everything you just heard is for educational purposes. It's not a diagnosis, and it's not a substitute for a conversation with your own doctor, who knows your history far better than any video ever could. If anything here resonated with you, bring it up with them directly, and never hesitate to seek emergency care if you're genuinely concerned. Trust that instinct over any hesitation about making a fuss. My goal with this channel will always be the same: real research, translated into something you can actually use to protect your health and the health of the people you love. You don't need to fear every tired afternoon or every odd ache. You just need to stop dismissing the pattern when it shows up. If your body is speaking to you this week, in whatever quiet way it's chosen, please, listen. That's the whole message. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.
Dr. William Mercer.